What's up, YouTube? Want to do an update on this Ukraine thing. And of course, everybody's got a lot of hyperbolic opinions. Everybody is certain of what we should do or shouldn't do. Some people are certain that no-fly zone is good. Some people are certain that no-fly zone is bad. At the end of my last video on Ukraine, I talked about how I thought a no-fly zone would be a good idea. However, that was kind of in the heat of the moment. The war had just started a few days before that. And I didn't completely think through all the consequences of that. And, after thinking about it, as much as I would love to help, kinetically in Ukraine, and like I said, I'm typically very, very, very anti-war. So for me, it's a little bit difficult to say that, but I think this is one situation where the world would maybe not be completely against us intervening. It's not a war that we are the aggressor in, and potentially some people might be okay with it, but it would drastically increase the chance of nuclear war, so that eliminates it, that takes it off the table for me. Which is kind of typically where I stand on war-related issues. I tend to not be in favor of U.S. involvement directly in conflict, even though we always seem to be involved. Like I said, we can't do it because even if it only increases the odds by like 1%, that's way too much. And also with that, the sanctions. Potentially, I'm going to switch screens here, but it looks like the sanctions potentially, this is purely anecdotal, and you guys know that I'm not a fan of using anecdotal evidence too often, but when you have the second largest oil producer, Lukoil, asked on Thursday for the ending of conflict as soon as possible on its website. So some of these Russian oligarchs and these giant mega corporations in Russia are starting to put pressure on Putin, potentially, and we've seen a lot, and again, this is anecdotal, but we've seen a lot of Russian citizens leaving Russia. There's continues to be more and more pressure, so the sanctions might actually be having an effect. It's the economic effect and the long-term effects. It's going to take a long time to know on that, but I'm almost certain it'll have devastating economic effects. I think that's very likely, and it may take a while. It may not be instant, but things like this, and you've seen the images of Putin sitting at his tables, way far away from everybody. He's isolating himself. The guy is nervous about his own people and his own people. There's probably a lot of people that want to take the guy out. So there are those things that are happening that potentially could develop into this, and the sanctions could actually work. We'll see. It remains to be seen. It's way too early to speculate, but we've seen some good anecdotal evidence so far that potentially there might be some things working there. But that being said, the sanctions themselves also increase the chance of nuclear war. So there are a lot of things that we have already done that increase the chance of nuclear war. Now, clearly, I think a no-fly zone would probably escalate it a lot compared to the sanctions. So, like I said, I'm shifting to not being in favor of the no-fly zone now after thinking about it and looking at all the evidence and having a little bit more perspective. But it is painful to say that. I'll get into it more later, but it's painful to say that because it could also be a mistake to not intervene. We'll talk about that more. But there are those that are taking this extreme viewpoint that there are a lot of people calling for World War III and no-fly zone, and I have not found a lot of people. There's some in the media but there's not a lot of senators. I found 2 U.S. senators, so 2 out of 100 that were in favor of a no-fly zone so far that have publicly called for it. And maybe there's more, but those are the only 2 I could find. There's not a lot of people calling for it. And what's funny about this is Sagar, he's very on this, that there's so many people calling for it. There's not a lot of people calling for this. And it's funny coming from Sagar, who got it extremely wrong that Putin would invade when there was, the intelligence said that was going to happen, and I get it, they didn't trust the intelligence. And a lot of that comes from the Iraq war, but The Bush administration really wanted that war, and I think they were pushing some bad intel on purpose to try to get public support for the war. I think it was a little different situation, and people made that same case with Biden here, that he was pushing for war to try to help his image, and I wouldn't rule that out. But clearly now, with hindsight bias on our side, I think that it wasn't, the West pushing for war. I think it was Putin pushing for war. He's been the aggressor. A lot of people have tried to blame the West. A lot of people in the West are blaming the West for this war, when he is by far the number one guy to blame. That is Putin. So I just want to get that out of the way. There's not that many people calling for it. I tried to find, I could find only two guys, Roger Wicker and Adam Kinzinger, both Republicans, that are calling for this no-fly zone. That's all I have found from the U.S. And the thing about it is, Biden's against it. That means apparently some people on his staff are against it. Plus, there are many in the NATO that are against it. A lot of people would have to be for it. It has to get through NATO to get to that point. I don't think the U.S. is going to act on its own without NATO support, like they did in the past, like we have in the past in Iraq and other places. So there's a lot of people. There's enough people against it. I think it's highly unlikely that a no-fly zone would happen. So all the people being hyperbolic about there's going to be a no-fly zone, and so many people are calling for it. It's not the case. There's not that many people calling for it. But like I said, it's a complex situation, and to say for sure that this or that would happen, and Sager and these other guys, they're basically saying no-fly zone is automatic World War III, which they're probably right on that, to be honest. But automatic nuclear war, if you watch his videos, he's making the case that no-fly zone is almost certainly leading to nuclear war, and I don't know that that's the case. Like I said, I'm against nuclear war, but the hyperbole that's coming out on this stuff, it's getting ridiculous, like it always is. But it's really amplified when we're talking about life and death. We're talking about people's lives. We're talking about war. It's very amplified in that case. And I'll admit, like I said, the only people that truly know what the odds are and what the best thing to do is are the people that are sitting in these security briefings every day. And Sager isn't. I'm not. Nobody is sitting in these things except our leaders. And of course, our guy, Mr. Biden, he makes me really nervous to me, the guy's got dementia. He's very old. I don't think he's completely with it. I think all that stuff's true that people have said. I mean, maybe there's some hyperbole. I think there's some exaggeration on some of that. Some of that is maybe his stuttering or whatever. But it does make me nervous that I think the guy's not completely competent, and we're staring down the biggest threat we have since the Cold War. That does make me a little nervous, I'm not going to lie. But the good thing is, like I've said, there's a lot of people involved. It's not just Biden making the decisions. He's got a cabinet. He's got a Secretary of Defense. I looked this guy up. I don't know a lot about him, but the guy apparently was in the military. He served a long time in the military, like 40-some years, and he has a lot of experience. He surely knows the ramifications of escalation here and what it would do. I get a little nervous when we have Secretary of Defense that's a former general, because this is anecdotal, but it really seems like a lot of these generals, they're very, very, they push for war often. But I don't know where this guy stands. I honestly don't know. I haven't had the time to really research him. I don't know if he's like a warmonger typically or not, but it just seems like a lot of these ex-generals that become Secretary of Defense, they just seem to be very in favor of war, but we'll see. So far it seems like he must not be, because Biden is definitely not in favor of the no-fly zone, which I think is something he's correct on. But like I said, many people with minimal information are making these very bold statements, and that's a little dangerous when people do that. Like I said, I think the U.S. and NATO are in an extremely tough position. It's almost damned if you do, damned if you don't, because if we don't do anything further than what we've done, there's a very strong possibility that it may take several months, but very strong possibility that Putin would have complete control of Ukraine in a few months. And then maybe that's a mistake, because when Germany invaded Poland and the world did nothing, the U.S. did nothing, it gave him a foothold, and to further attacks gave him more territory, more resources. That could be a similar issue here, where you give the guy a foothold into Europe for further attacks, and then eventually World War III comes and we're in a weaker position because he's got more territory to work with. And granted, his economy hopefully by then is wrecked from the sanctions, so maybe that'll offset it, but it's not as cut and dry as a lot of these talking heads. And the people on YouTube, I tell you, the people on YouTube are worse than the media in most cases. So you got these guys calling out the media on YouTube, and a lot of them are they're so extreme. They're more extreme on these social media platforms than they are on traditional media. And the traditional media is bad enough, but then you get into YouTube and it gets way, way worse in many cases. Like I said, not a lot of people calling for it. You got the two senators. Zelensky obviously called for it. But of course he's going to call for it. I mean, Sager, if he was in that position, would call for it too. I would call for it if I was the leader of Ukraine. I mean, it's tough there, man. So they're going to call for it. All that being said, nuclear war, very unlikely. Very, very unlikely. I still think even if we did a no-fly zone, I still think it's probably unlikely, but you can't take that risk, obviously. That being said, this website is called Ready.gov, and you'll see that. Well, you can't see that because it's www.ready.gov. I guess you don't need the www today. I still remember the time when everybody repeated the URL verbatim, and now the first part nobody says anymore. Ready.gov. I guess they recently updated this website. It's a U.S. government website. It basically talks about what to do in the event of a nuclear explosion. And I didn't know some of these things. I actually watched a video on YouTube recently from a guy that talked about this. And some of this stuff I wasn't aware of. And I think it's a good idea to at least just read through this. It's very short. At least read through this so you know what to do in case it happens, because obviously if we get to the point of nuclear war, by the time the nukes start flying, we might not even have power. There might have been a cyber attack that eliminated power, so it's not like you're going to be able to sit here and Google this real quick and figure it out. So not a bad idea to educate yourself on this in the very, very rare off chance that this happens. So at least you give yourself a chance. Now, if we have full-scale nuclear war, we're not going to have much of a chance, obviously. But still a good idea in case it becomes just a isolated event, which probably, if one starts flying, probably many start flying. But still, the main thing, obviously, if you're within the blast radius of this thing, you're probably not going to make it, unfortunately. And the radiation and things like that could kill you slowly in a week. The radiation burns are some of the worst possible thing. You'd rather be in the direct hit of it and just die instantly and vaporize than be like a mile or two away and get hit with that radiation and die slowly. But then the other thing is the fallout. If you're far enough away from it to where you don't get hit by the shockwave, you don't get hit by the radiation and the heat coming off of the explosion, the fallout can be extremely dangerous, and that is what this document will help you with. The main thing is the first 15 minutes after the explosion, you have time to get into shelter. And the key here is to get into a shelter, if you can, that is brick or concrete instead of wood, if you can. If you have 15 minutes, know where the nearest fallout shelter is in your town. A lot of times, like hospitals have a lot of concrete. They probably have areas that are designated as fallout shelters. So know where those are. And if you have time, get in the car and go to it. If you have 15 minutes to get there, try to get there. Now, hopefully there's not a lot of people there and you can actually get in. Is it a risk maybe to do that? Potentially it's a risk. If you get in traffic and you can't get in to the building, that could be a major problem. If you don't have time and you're not sure you can get to a fallout shelter, get to the lowest level of your building, middle of the building, and like under a stairwell, just like you would with a tornado. For those of us that live in Tornado Alley, you know what I'm talking about. It says wear a mask. Well, yeah, that's for COVID, I guess. Whatever. Stay inside for 24 hours. The main thing is the first hour is the most radioactive, and then it starts to fall off drastically. So 5-6 hours in, it's quite a bit safer than the first hour. The first hour is by far the most dangerous, and that's when you need to be in shelter. And if you happen to be caught outside and the fallout is getting on your clothes, it talks about it here, but you want to take your clothes off extremely slowly, and try not to disturb that fallout that potentially is on your clothes. And then you want to dispose of those clothes, and then you want to take a shower, basically, I believe is what it says. Yeah, avoid touching your eyes. Yeah. Yep. And it doesn't say all these things here that this guy in the video said, but it might be good to get some other sources. But yeah, know your locations, know your shelter locations. Even during your commute, if it happens during your commute, know where you can go. Outdoors, obviously, the worst place to be. Inside of some sort is better than nothing, and built vehicle is not inside. But I guess if you're out in the absolute middle of nowhere, I guess a vehicle would be better than outside. And then, things like having an emergency kit, things like that. And this is something that I don't even do, really. I don't have an emergency kit. But I think in the current situation, before there's a rush for this stuff, because if things continue to heat up, you'll see a lot of people become preppers all of a sudden. So just having this basic kit, it doesn't take much to get that. And there's even people on Amazon that put together these kits and sell them. And of course, there's probably a huge markup, and you could easily make this yourself and not pay the markup. And there's additional things that they've added. And now your kit could get pretty big after a while with all this stuff, but not a bad idea. People call it a bug out bag, is what a lot of people call it. Not a bad idea to have this thing available just in case. Not a bad idea to have some perishable food in your house, a lot of canned food just in case. Maybe some water. Not a bad idea. Anyways, like I said, I think it's unlikely, but I think it's not a bad idea to do a little bit of prepping, as I think the risks are probably higher now than they've probably been in the last 40 years for sure, of something very terrible happening. And hopefully it doesn't get to that, because if it gets to that, we're probably screwed. I mean, you can have your kid if you want, but you're probably screwed, unfortunately, if we do get to that point. So hopefully our leadership can prevent it. We'll see. See you guys.